Welcome to Paranormal Northwest, a podcast all about the history and the paranormal of the Pacific Northwest. Join me as I tell stories of this great region, the history, the people who live here, and those who may have never left. Today we are traveling to a place dear to my own history, Fort Stevens in Oregon. When I was growing up, my grandparents would take my brother, cousin, and I camping. We explored many parts of the Cascades. One year, we decided to try something new, a little different. That was the first summer of a handful that we spent time on the northwestern tip of Oregon. I have scars on my knees and elbows from falling off my bike on the trails lining the beaches, and the unique aroma of salt air and campfire smoke make them ache. Diving into the history of a unique Pacific Northwest location brought back many memories, and exploring the paranormal stories spooked me a bit. So, grab your sweater, your blanket, and a cup of tea, and let's get started. Fort Stevens is located in Hammond, Oregon, and was originally built from 1863 to 1864 during the Civil War. Originally named the fort at Point Adams, it was renamed only a few years later to Fort Stevens, after former territorial governor Isaac Stevens, who, as controversial as he might be, does deserve a deep dive. Isaac Stevens was born in 1818 in Andover, Massachusetts. Descended from early American Puritans, Stevens was raised on his family's farm and educated at West Point Military Academy. He graduated from West Point in 1839 at the top of his class. Despite his small, or sometimes hysterically noted as diminutive stature at 5'3", Stevens led an impressive military career. He fought in the Mexican-American War in the late 1840s and was recognized for numerous acts of bravery. After the war, he worked as a military surveyor in New England. In 1852, Stevens campaigned fervently for fellow veteran and friend Franklin Pierce in his campaign for president. Pierce won the election and later instilled Stevens as the governor of Washington Territory. Stevens was officially awarded the position on March 17, 1853. Stevens made his way slowly across the continent on his way to the Washington Territory, surveying the land as he went. This surveying project was the first step in the eventual creation of the Transcontinental Railroad. The survey work that Stevens did paved the path for the railroad of the latter half of the 19th century. He finally made it to Olympia in November of 1853 and began his role as governor. In conjunction with his role as governor, he also held the position of Superintendent of Indian Affairs. To this day, and to some even at the time, Stevens' approach to Indian affairs was controversial. His legacy is one of broken treaties and stolen land. The lasting impacts of his approach to Native relations is still felt within the region today, and not for good. Stevens used his position and power as governor to intimidate and coerce the Native people to give up their lands. Historians and even contemporaries believe that many of the signatures signed within the many treaties were forged. When the United States government officially recognized the Washington Territory in 1853, Stevens and his territorial government began to forge these treaties, often under any means necessary. While many of the native tribes officially recognized the sovereignty of the U.S. government in the region, they did so unwillingly. In exchange, many tribes and groups were entitled to receive the fishing rights their people had traditionally observed. So, taking a step back, the native people of the region were not helpless, far from it, in fact. In response to the coercion and force used by Stevens and his territorial government, many native people fought back. The Yakima War was a conflict that took place in the Washington Territory from 1855 to 1858. It was a part of a larger series of conflicts known as the Puget Sound War, involving several Native American tribes in the region resisting American settlement and encroachment on their lands. The Yakima War primarily involved the Yakima living in the Yakima Valley region of Washington. Tensions had been rising between the Yakima people and the settlers and miners who were moving into the area in increasing numbers, leading to clashes over land rights, resources, and cultural differences. The catalyst for the war was the signing of the Treaty of Yakima in 1855, which established a reservation for the Yakima people, but also ceded a vast amount of their traditional territory to the United States government. Many Yakima leaders opposed the treaty and refused to sign it, leading to a split within the tribe. Violence erupted in 1855 when a group of Yakima warriors attacked a wagon train traveling through their territory, killing several settlers. This incident sparked a series of retaliatory attacks and counterattacks between the Yakima and American forces. The conflict escalated over the following years, with both sides committing acts of violence in retaliation. The war came to an official end in 1858 with the signing of the Treaty of Walla Walla, which resulted in the establishment of the Yakima Indian Reservation and brought a temporary peace to the region. However, tensions between the Yakima people and the U.S. government continued in the decades to follow, as the government failed to uphold many of the promises made in the treaties, leading to further conflicts and injustices. Fort Stevens. Fort Stevens is located near Hammond, Oregon, which is on the northwestern point of the state, and it has a rich history dating back to the Civil War. Fort Stevens was established in 1863 as part of a broader strategy by the Union Army to fortify key coastal areas against potential Confederate threats during the American Civil War. Located at the mouth of the Columbia River near Hammond, Oregon, Fort Stevens was strategically positioned to defend the vital waterway and the nearby city of Astoria, which served as an important supply hub for the region. The fort is now named in honor of Isaac Stevens. Stevens had his distinguished military career, as we noted, before he became governor, and he played a significant role in the further exploration and expansion of not just the Washington Territory, but the American West, where he was still involved in surveying along with his duties to create the treaties with Native American tribes. Because of Stevens' military background and his contributions to the development of the region, it made him a fitting namesake for the newly established fort. Naming military installations after notable figures was a common practice during this period, serving both as a tribute to individuals who had made significant contributions to their country and as a means of instilling pride and a sense of purpose among the soldiers stationed there. By naming Fort Stevens after Isaac Stevens, the Union Army not only honored his legacy, but also reinforced the fort's connection to the broader mission of securing and defending the American West. The fort would go on to play a crucial role in safeguarding the region during the Civil War and beyond, leaving a lasting legacy that is still visible today in the form of Fort Stevens State Park and its historical attractions. During the Civil War era, Fort Stevens played a pivotal role as a coastal defense fortification, guarding the mouth of the Columbia River, a crucial lifeline for the Union. Where it was situated along the Oregon coast made Fort Stevens strategically positioned to prevent Confederate naval vessels from entering the river and potentially disrupting Union supply lines and commerce in the Pacific Northwest. The threat of Confederate naval attacks loomed large during this period, prompting the Union Army to fortify key coastal locations along both the Pacific and Atlantic coasts. Fort Stevens was just one such strategic stronghold, equipped with artillery batteries, gun emplacements, and other defensive structures designed to repel enemy vessels and protect the surrounding region from invasion. Despite its strategic importance, Fort Stevens never saw any direct combat during the Civil War. The absence of Confederate naval incursions into the Pacific Northwest meant that the fort's defensive capabilities were not put to the test in actual combat situations. However, the mere presence of Fort Stevens served as a deterrent to potential Confederate aggression and helped to maintain Union control over the region throughout the conflict. While Fort Stevens may not have experienced direct military engagements during the Civil War, its significance as a coastal defense installation expanded far beyond wartime operations. The fort played a vital role in safeguarding the Columbia River and the nearby city of Astoria, ensuring the uninterrupted flow of supplies and resources to Union forces in the Pacific Northwest. After the Civil War, Fort Stevens continued to serve as a key military installation, undergoing expansions and modernization efforts to adapt to evolving threats and technologies. Although it never saw combat during the war, Fort Stevens' legacy as a vital coastal defense fortification remains an important part of its historical significance. Today, visitors to Fort Stevens State Park can explore the remnants of the fort and learn about its role in protecting the Pacific Northwest during the Civil War era. Following the Civil War, Fort Stevens underwent significant expansions and modernization efforts, adapting to new military technologies and evolving strategic priorities. The late 1800s marked a period of increased tensions and geopolitical competition, prompting the United States to bolster its coastal defenses to protect key coastal areas from potential threats. During this time period, one of the primary focuses of the modernization efforts was the enhancement of its artillery capabilities. The fort was equipped with a variety of artillery batteries, including large caliber coastal defense guns capable of engaging enemy ships at long ranges. These guns were strategically positioned along the coastline to provide overlapping fields of fire and maximize the fort's defensive coverage. In addition to upgrading its artillery, Fort Stevens underwent infrastructure improvements to support its expanded capabilities. This included the construction of new barracks, command facilities, ammunition storage bunkers, and other support structures to accommodate the larger garrison and ensure the smooth operation of the fort. Fort Stevens was not an isolated installation, but rather part of a broader network of coastal defense fortifications along the Pacific coast. These forts were strategically positioned to provide overlapping coverage and mutual support, allowing them to effectively defend against potential naval threats. Fort Stevens worked in conjunction with other nearby forts, such as Fort Columbia and Fort Canby, to create a cohesive coastal defense system for the Pacific Northwest. The late 19th century also saw advancements in military technology, influencing the modernization efforts at Fort Stevens. These included improvements in artillery design, the introduction of rifled artillery pieces, and the development of new coastal defense technologies such as underwater mines and torpedo systems. Fort Stevens incorporated these innovations into its own defense strategies and to enhance its effectiveness against potential threats. By the late 1800s, Fort Stevens had emerged as a key military installation in the Pacific Northwest. Equipped with state-of-the-art defenses and a well-trained garrison ready to defend against any potential adversaries. Its strategic location at the mouth of the Columbia River made it a vital component of the nation's coastal defense network, ensuring the security of the region and safeguarding American interests in the Pacific Northwest. During World War I, Fort Stevens was mobilized once again for coastal defense, as the United States government sought to protect its shores from potential naval threats. Due to its position at the mouth of the Columbia River, the fort was key to the coastal defense network, playing a vital role in safeguarding the Pacific Northwest during the conflict of World War I. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the United States implemented stringent coastal surveillance measures to protect against possible attacks by enemy vessels. Fort Stevens played a crucial role in this effort, utilizing its observation posts, coastal artillery batteries, and communication systems to monitor maritime traffic and respond to any potential threats. In preparation for possible enemy incursions, Fort Stevens conducted extensive training exercises to ensure that its garrison was well prepared to defend against naval attacks. Soldiers received instruction in artillery operations, coastal defense tactics, and other relevant skills to enhance their readiness for combat. One of the primary concerns during World War I was the threat posed by enemy submarines, which had proven to be a formidable weapon against Allied shipping. Fort Stevens implemented anti-submarine measures, including the deployment of submarine nets, underwater mines, and patrols by naval vessels, all to protect the waters off the Oregon coast from potential submarine attacks. Despite the mobilization of Fort Stevens and other coastal defense installations during World War I, The Pacific Northwest did not see any direct enemy action during the conflict. The absence of significant naval threats in the region meant that Fort Stevens did not engage in combat operations against enemy forces. While Fort Stevens did not experience combat during World War I, its role in coastal defense was nonetheless significant. The fort's presence helped to deter potential enemy attacks and contributed to the overall security of the Pacific Northwest during a time of global conflict. After the war, Fort Stevens continued to serve as a vital military installation, albeit with reduced operational significance as the nation's strategic priorities shifted in the post-war era. But, as many are familiar with that timeline of the 20th century, the post-war era didn't last long. And in the late 30s, the fort was activated once again. During World War II, Fort Stevens assumed a critical role in defending the Pacific Northwest against potential enemy threats, particularly after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, which officially brought the United States into the war. The fort's strategic location made it a key asset in safeguarding the region's coastline and vital shipping lanes from potential attacks from enemy naval forces. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Fort Stevens, along with much of the West Coast, was placed on high alert, and its defensive capabilities were significantly bolstered to prepare for possible enemy incursions along the Pacific Northwest coast. The fort's coastal artillery batteries were fully manned, and additional anti-aircraft guns were deployed to enhance its air defense capabilities. On the night of June 24, 1942, Fort Stevens became the only mainland U.S. military installation to come under direct enemy fire during World War II, when a Japanese submarine, later identified as the I-25, surfaced off the coast and fired several shells toward the fort. The attack, which occurred under cover of darkness, targeted the fort's gun batteries and observation posts. Fort Stevens quickly responded to the attack, returning fire with its coastal artillery batteries and alerting nearby military installations and naval vessels to the threat. Although the shelling caused minor damage to some buildings and infrastructure within the fort, including a baseball field and a power station, there were no casualties among the fort's garrison. The attack on Fort Stevens marked a significant event in the history of the Pacific Northwest and served as a stark reminder of the region's vulnerability to enemy attacks during World War II. When the damage caused by the shelling was relatively minor, the incident underscored the importance of maintaining vigilant coastal defenses and heightened awareness of the potential threat posed by enemy naval forces operating off the U.S. coastline. Today, the attack on Fort Stevens is commemorated as a significant chapter in the history of the Pacific Northwest during World War II. Visitors to Fort Stevens State Park can explore the remnants of the fort and learn about its role in defending the region against enemy threats during the war, including the Japanese submarine attack of June 1942. Following the conclusion of World War II, Fort Stevens underwent a period of transition as the nation's military priorities shifted and the need for coastal defense installations diminished. The post-war period saw a gradual decline in the fort's military significance, leading to its eventual decommissioning in 1947. However, the site's historical value was recognized, and it was repurposed for civilian use under the jurisdiction of the Oregon State Parks Department. With the end of World War II and the onset of the Cold War, the United States reevaluated its military posture and strategic priorities. Advances in technology, including the development of long-range bombers and intercontinental ballistic missiles, reduced the importance of traditional coastal defense installations like Fort Stevens. As a result, the fort was deemed surplus to military requirements and decommissioned in 1947, marking the end of its active military service. Following its decommissioning, the site of Fort Stevens was transferred to the Oregon State Parks Department, which recognized the historical and recreational value of the property. The State Parks Department assumed responsibility for managing and preserving the site, ensuring that its historical significance would be preserved for future generations. In 1955, Fort Stevens officially became part of Fort Stevens State Park, which encompasses a vast area of coastline along the northern Oregon coast. The park offers a range of recreational opportunities, including camping, hiking, beach combing, and wildlife viewing. Visitors to the park can explore the remnants of Fort Stevens, including its gun batteries, bunkers, and other military structures, which serve as tangible reminders of the fort's storied past. Over the years, efforts have been made to preserve and interpret the historical significance of Fort Stevens within the context of Fort Stevens State Park. Interpretive signage, guided tours, and educational programs provide visitors with insights into the fort's military history and its role in defending the Pacific Northwest during World War II. The park's museum also houses exhibits related to the fort's history, offering visitors a deeper understanding of its significance. Today, Fort Stevens State Park is a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts and history buffs alike. Its scenic natural beauty, combined with its rich historical heritage, makes it a unique and compelling destination for visitors of all ages. Whether camping on the beach, hiking through coastal forests, or exploring the remnants of Fort Stevens, visitors to the park can experience the best of Oregon's natural and cultural heritage in one unforgettable location. Visitors today enjoy exploring the park, and they aren't the only ones. From Portland Ghosts, one group of campers stopped to pitch their tents near the fort one summer evening. Even before night fell, members of the group began to feel uneasy, as if someone or something were watching them. Deciding to ignore their gut feeling, the group finished setting up their campground, made their dinner, and crawled into their tents to sleep. But that night was to be a long and restless one. Just as campers were beginning to drift off to sleep, the sound of gravel crunching under boots jolted them awake. One of the campers reports an inexplicable, eerie feeling as if all the hairs on the back of his neck stood right up. Unsure of what to do, the group remained silent inside their tent as the boots paced back and forth outside. Soon enough, whoever it was left, and the terrified group of campers eventually managed to fall asleep. The next morning, the campers ventured out of their tents to check for boot prints in the dirt. The ones they found were unlike any they had ever seen before. Confused and thoroughly creeped out, the group decided to skip the hike they had planned for that morning and head straight back for their car instead. They made it safely inside, but just as they were driving away, one of them looked back to see the figure of a tall man dressed in a World War II-era military uniform, watching them. His frame grew smaller and smaller in the car's back windshield, until finally, he disappeared. One of the most significant features at Fort Stevens State Park is a large battery, Battery Russell. The battery overlooks the ocean and stands as a large, imposing reminder of the fort's history. For my own time exploring the battery, no matter what time of day or temperature of the air around it, the passages within the battery itself were always cold, and I'm not the only one who's felt that. There have been numerous reports over the years of visitors within the battery feeling unnaturally cold, even in the heat. Visitors report feeling as though someone else is in the rooms and passageways of the battery with them, even when they know they are alone. Some visitors have even recorded bodiless voices using recording equipment. However, the most striking paranormal element is that of another full specter. Numerous visitors have reported encountering and even interacting with a man dressed in an out-of-date military uniform. While descriptions of the man are often vague, similar to the story I just read, leading me at least to be unsure if these are all different specters, he is always described as being in some sort of old-fashioned military garb. He's mentioned being seen throughout the park, but most often in or near Battery Russell. While I never encountered this unknown military man that I remember, I do have fond memories of Fort Stevens. If you are looking for a great camping spot on the Oregon coast this summer, add it to your list, or just visit for a day trip. Thank you for taking this trip down memory lane with me. If you have stories of your own to share, follow me on social media at ParaNWPod and message or comment on a post. Also, check out our merch! We have a few different designs to represent your favorite aspects of the Pacific Northwest. Until next time, bye!